Interesting text this morning, and often we zero in on one line. If man doesn't work, he doesn't eat. And we use that to, well, maybe not we, some people have used it to argue against welfare. They use it to kind of use it as a way to withhold, to kind of find an excuse to not give, to not help. And it's kind of a crime, because it's not looking at the whole text within the context of what's actually going on in Thessalonica. They should not be used in that way. And if Paul knew that that verse was being used to say, like, oh, we're not going to help you, he might not have written it. So I want to give you kind of a little context of what most likely was going on. I'm not going to say this with 100%, but most people say this is what's going on. Is in Thessalonica, they heard Jesus is coming soon. And when they heard Jesus is coming soon, they were like, Jesus is coming on Tuesday. He's coming really soon. The end of the world is coming within days. And if you think the end of the world is coming in days, I'm just going to guess what you're not going to do is set your alarm clock and go to work the next morning. And so a lot of these people quit their jobs because they're like, dude, the end of the world is coming soon. And now some time has passed. A lot of time has passed. And both letters to Thessalonica kind of wrestle with, how come the end hasn't quite come yet? And so people are kind of figuring out, okay, maybe the end's not coming like as soon as we thought. I'm going to go back to work. But some of those people didn't go back to work, either because they were lazy or they were like, actually, I kind of quit in a rage of fury. I cursed out some customers, punched my boss, can't go back. I don't know what happened. But for whatever reason, there's some people who are still not working. And they're kind of feeding off of the church. They're freeloading off the church. The church is, they're giving all their funds and all their money and all their time to help these people. And these people are just kind of sitting around, not doing anything, causing issues. The NRSV version says they're being irresponsible. These are people who can work, who can contribute, but they're choosing not to. They've kind of decided, well, it's actually easier to let them be responsible for me. And so really this text fits really well with what we've been talking about. One is you can see Paul kind of saying, hey, you need to take personal responsibility. If you're able to work and contribute and are just choosing not to, you need to do that. But then on the other side, you actually see Paul telling the church, you need to draw a line somewhere of how much you're going to do, of how much you're going to serve. Because we want you to serve, we want you to give, we want you to be benevolent and do ministry. But you don't want you don't want to empty all that into someone who really knows better, into someone who really should be helping you with ministry and not just be sitting there and being ministered to. So this is where you kind of need to draw a line and say, look, we're not, if you're a church member and you're not working and you're just feeding off of us, like we're going to put a stop to that. Which it sounds mean. It sounds mean, but the rest of the church is probably really thankful. Like, thank you. Yes, we've been taking care of these people for a really long time. Now we can take all of that energy and all that effort that was going into them, and then we can put that somewhere else. And we can use that in a different way. So it's not saying like if somebody loses their job, you shouldn't take care of them. If people are in financial hard times in the church, you should take care of them, and even if they're not working. So we shouldn't use that to say don't help people. Paul really wants us to help people. And even here, kind of the idea is like, all right, they're causing problems because they're being idle, but we can take some of this service, we can take some of that energy, we can take some of these funds and put them elsewhere. And so I really think it's a good example of how we as Christians, as individuals, and as a church, need to set up some boundaries on how far we'll go and how much responsibility we'll take for someone else. Yeah, we sometimes need to take responsibility for others, especially those who can't take responsibility for themselves. But these are people who can take responsibility for themselves and are just choosing not to. And that's kind of where the line is drawn. One thing I really want you to hear this morning is that it is good to set boundaries in lots of different ways. But specifically, I want you thinking about setting boundaries in how much we're going to serve and how much responsibility we're going to take. The way Lisa Turkhurst says it is, it's not just a good idea to set boundaries. It's God's idea. It's not just a good idea, it's God's idea. You see that here in our text. You see some boundaries being set up. You see with Jesus, there was often times when he would withdraw from crowds. He needed a break. He needed to go and recharge. But just the whole concept of Sabbath. Sabbath is recognizing our limitations, setting aside space in our lives for a break. It's recognizing that God is limitless and I am not. So I have to take a break. I must withdraw. And so it's okay to set boundaries. It's not something we're making up. It's not just a good idea. It's God's idea. And it's also an act of humility. I think that's really important. I know for a lot of us in here are probably people pleasers, right? Anybody a people pleaser out there? Anybody guilty of that? Yeah, I'm a recovering people pleaser. I've had to quit being one when I became a preacher. But it's a challenge, right? It's a challenge because you want people to be happy with you. And really the hardest thing people pleasers can do, the most difficult thing for us, is to say no. It's hard to say no. It's hard to set up those boundaries. And if you can learn to say no and not feel guilty about it. That's really kind of what I want you to not feel guilty about saying no. If you are doing all this ministry, if you are self-emptying, if you are serving all the time and you have to say no to something, you don't need to feel guilty about that. If you're setting a healthy personal boundary. If you can learn to say no and not feel guilty, it is life-altering. And you also need to acknowledge that saying yes in one area of your life, it's actually saying no somewhere else. Saying yes to taking on a new responsibility, it might be saying no to another responsibility or not handling that responsibility as well as you could or should. But I have good news for you. If you're one of those, if you're the type kind of like me, who's kind of a people pleaser, one, I think people take it better. People take no better than you think. They can handle that. And this is maybe kind of a negative take on it, but look, if you're really worried about someone not liking you because you tell them no, or because you set a boundary, if you're worried about somebody leaving you, or because you've set up and said, no, I'm not going to do that, I have this boundary. If you're really worried about them leaving you and they do it, they were probably going to do it anyway. That was probably an unhealthy relationship anyway. And so you really don't worry about it too much. If that's really what it's going to take, then it's going to happen anyway. So because healthy people, they respect healthy boundaries. They accept them because they know their own limitations and they're willing to respect yours. So a few places, and I want you to be praying about this and thinking about this, is where in your own life do you need to set up boundaries? And I will also say this. This is more of a message for the people who are really taking responsibility for others, who are really serving, who are really being self-empty. Some of us need to set up move boundaries up and say, hey, I need to serve a little bit more. But this is for the people who are taking a lot of responsibility and taking a lot of things in your hands. You may need to set up some boundaries. And so a few that I want to suggest is families and marriages. Look, those are sacred. If helping others, if taking responsibility for others greatly infringes on your family or your marriage, you need to draw a line. You need to say, hey, that's where this stops. Now, that's not to say sometimes you might miss a family dinner because a friend is in crisis. Or you might miss part of a Saturday time with family because you're mowing a widow's lawn or you're prepping for a Bible class or BSF. You know, there's a little space where it can impact that. But if you're starting to feel your family resenting you, missing you too much, if your responsibilities as a parent or spouse kind of seem like they're starting to be neglected, if you're performing more poorly with family and being really drained, you kind of need to, hey, wait, maybe I need to say no to something. Maybe I need to set up some more boundaries. Maybe I need to make more space for my family. And just as a side note, and I say this to motivate you, not shame you, but I think at Westgate, I think we're neglecting our marriages. I think a lot of us are neglecting our marriages. We're more focused on work, career, kids, sports, friends, other hobbies, because we feel secure in our marriages. But we're kind of neglecting them. And I would really like to see us refocus on our responsibilities there. And I'm telling you this, we have the marriage retreat coming up, and we got some other things coming up where we're going to be praying for and working on transforming our marriages. And I would like to see that be one of the main focuses of Westgate as we move into the new year, is to find ways to quit neglecting our marriages and our responsibilities there and start focusing on that more. So be on the lookout for some things we have coming up. So another area where we really should set boundaries when we're serving and doing ministry and helping is when helping hurts. And that's really what was going on in Thessalonica. Paul's like, look, you're helping these people, but it is not doing any good. In fact, by helping these people, they're actually becoming busybodies and stirring up stuff. They're bored and they're causing trouble. Like, that's not okay. Whenever you're helping someone so much to where they can't grow, they can't change. And you think about this a lot with money, right? If I keep helping this person with money, they're not going to learn financial responsibility. And that's part of it. But there's a lot more to it than that. A lot of times we help people in ways that hurt them, and it's done out of an act of love. We love someone so much, we don't want to see them face the consequences of their poor decision. We want to swoop in and bail them out and fix their problems, but sometimes that's actually not helpful. Sometimes you actually need to set up that boundary, don't bail them out, and let them face the consequences of their actions. Now, that's a case-by-case basis, and that takes some discernment to know when to insert yourself and when to not. So don't take that as a hard and fast rule, but there's a lot of times where we insert ourselves too much, we take too much responsibility, and this person's not able to learn or grow or change, and sometimes they end up just kind of feeding off of us. Helicopter parents, y'all are out there. I'm not going to make you raise your hand. We're all guilty of that in some ways, right? There's a lot of studies on how a lot of adults now who had helicopter parents don't know how to problem solve. They've lost creativity because the parents come in and they keep all the problems from happening in their lives. And so any deviation from everything running really smooth becomes a challenge. And then if anything really bad does happen, they don't know what to do. Because whenever the bad things happen in their childhood, the parents would come in and save the day. And so they don't have to learn how. So it's really one of the reasons you got adults with anxiety is because they didn't have to have anxiety when they were growing up, and helicopter parents were taking care of everything for them. And that's out of an act of love, right? Like, it's a loving thing to do that, to try to take care of the kids in that way, but sometimes you're taking so much responsibility for them that they haven't learned how to take responsibility for themselves. So, and on both of these sides, another way that when helping hurts is when you're helping and they don't want the help. When you're taking responsibility for them and they don't want you to do that. And so I think that happens a lot with parents, but it can happen with friends. It can happen with employers. And so you can know your help is not wanted. You can know you're crossing lines you're crossing boundaries. Whenever the person you are trying to help, the person you are trying to be responsible for, starts hiding things from you. If they're hiding things from you, it's because you've become too controlling. Because they don't want to give you that power. If they're seeking help elsewhere, they're going to other people, they're going to other parents, they're going to other adults, they're going to other employees, it means you've overstepped. If they're avoiding you, if they're circumnavigating you, you've taken too much responsibility from them and they're going elsewhere. And so I think that happens with employees. I think that happens with friends. I think it definitely happens with kids. So you may see an example of that in your life at some point where you're realizing, I'm taking too much responsibility from them. I'm crossing a personal boundary for myself by taking too much responsibility on, but I'm also crossing their boundaries because they didn't want me to take this responsibility from them. So oftentimes helping hurts because we've overstepped our boundaries. And then the last thing, and this is a hard one, is there are things that you can't control, that you try to take responsibility for, and it is exhausting because you don't have the power there to actually change that. And again, this is another one of those things that takes prayer and discernment to really know, do I have power and control here, or do I not? Can I impact change here, or is this not within me? Is this not part of my responsibility and control? And so it's very frustrating. So there may be things in your work or your organization that you really like to take responsibility for and change, but maybe you don't have the power. Maybe you really can't change that. And it feels like trying to fill up a bucket with holes in it to try to change that thing. And so sometimes you do need to acknowledge, well, this isn't my area of responsibility. I can't do that. A friend shared this with me last week, and I think this is important, is making a person happy. I want to make a friend happy. I want to help them be happy. I want to make my spouse happy. That's actually not totally your responsibility. That's something within them that you can't totally control. If you are trying to make someone be happy, you have taken too much of their emotional responsibility and put it on you. It's not healthy. It's not healthy. Oftentimes we take too much of someone else's emotions and something else they control, and we try to control it ourselves. Sometimes we can't fix people's problems when it requires output on their part that they just have to do. I can go clean up a hoarder's house, but it might just all get messed up again, and it might feel like it's in vain. Sometimes you can't make people do what they need to do. And trying to take control where you don't actually have control, it can actually become abusive. So you must recognize those boundaries. So sometimes there's only so much you can do for a person before they must help themselves. And that's going to be out of your responsibility and out of your control. So a really simple way of putting this that I think you'll understand and I think is really helpful is I will be responsible to you, but not for you. I will be responsible to my friends, but not for my friends. I will be responsible to my spouse, but not for my spouse. Once I start becoming responsible for them, I've crossed my own boundaries, and it's going to be exhausting, and it's going to be an emotional drain, and it's going to be frustrating. Now, the one place we are responsible for our kids to some extent, right? But that's something that we have to learn to change, to slowly let the line out. But think about that. Where in your relationships are you really trying to be responsible for a person when in reality you need to set the boundary, just be responsible to them? So I hope that you pray and take some time this week to evaluate where you need to set up clearer boundaries for your own personal self-care, but also so you can have really healthy responsibilities and tend to your responsibilities well. I hope you can claim your personal responsibilities, but also maybe take on the ones that God has placed on your heart, but be able to say no, whether it be someone trying to get you to take more. Sometimes it's people saying, hey, take some responsibility from me. And sometimes it's, I'm actually trying to take responsibility from someone else. Kind of need to keep both of those things in check and in their proper place. And again, it takes discernment. But I mentioned last week the serenity prayer, or 2 weeks ago, about how the serenity prayer, it's the prayer in 12-step programs, it's about recognizing my responsibility. It's about taking responsibility, which moves towards healing. That's like the first step. So once I take responsibility, I can begin to heal. I think the serenity prayer, the beginning of it, actually applies really well for the message this morning, too. The prayer starts like this: God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, and the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. So help me to know what is outside my power, what is outside of my control. Help me to know what is just the hand I've been dealt, and accept that, and live with that. And then help me to know what is my responsibility, what is within my control, what is within my power. And help me to have the courage to change that, and give me wisdom. Because sometimes the two things get really confused. Help me to know. Help me to know when to pick those battles. Guys, we have a God who has designed us to set boundaries. Boundaries are his idea. And we have a God who is ultimately willing to take on all responsibility. He took on all the responsibility when he went to the cross for us. If you want to give your life to him, we invite you to come now. As together we stand and sing.